Hi, this is Alex Kudryavtsov, and today I'm in the city of Shenzhen in China. Today we will have a conversation with Dr. Wu Linchong about environmental attitudes. Hello, Linchong.
你好，Alex。
You've done a lot of research about environmental attitudes. How do you define environmental attitudes?
我认为这个
I
环境
think
态度是一
environmental
个
attitude is a complicated concept. It has many components, so it's very difficult to describe it with a simple, clear definition. It can be love of nature, basic attitudes toward the environment, or specific attitudes towards certain issues. So, in my opinion, it's ambitious to define this concept.
I feel like environmental attitudes is such a complex construct. Did you work with something more specific within environmental attitudes?
当然了，我是
Of course,
关注
I
于这
focused
个
on
环境敏
environmental
感度
sensitivity and environmental
然后环境
values.
价值观 （environmental values）。
So I wonder what is environmental sensitivity?
我最先是从
Well,
Hungerford 的一
I
个
learned this concept from Hungerford and his research team. In my view, this concept is one's emotional feeling towards the natural environment. For example, some people prefer outdoor, like watching birds, seeing flowers, or connecting to nature. This is sensitivity.
Oh, that's very interesting. So how is it different from environmental values?
我觉得 values
I
就是
think environmental values are the lens through which people look at the environment and the relationship between human and the environment. For example, how do people look at a relationship between human development and ecological conservation? Do people think climate change is an exaggerated issue? How do we answer these questions depends on what kinds of value we hold.
And since we talk about environmental education, environmental educators will be interested to know how environmental values and environmental sensitivity, or the larger concept of environmental attitudes, leads or fosters pro-environmental behavior.
我认为这是个非常好的问
This
题。
is a
那么
very
我
good
觉得
question.
他们当然
Environmental sensitivity and values play a very important role in the development of one's environmental behaviors. These attitudes are important because they are fundamental precursors of more specific attitudes, which directly contribute to one's behaviors, such as personal norms and the willingness to act. For those who are interested in the development of environmental behaviors, I highly recommend students' research on value, belief, norm theory.
And in your research, you focused specifically on school children, is it correct?
是的，我是采用
Yes,
一个
I
案
did
例
a
的
case
方法
study in several green schools in Shenzhen, China. I conducted surveys with about 500 students from grade 4 to grade 5 to measure the outcomes of the environmental education programs in these schools. I found that the environmental attitudes, such as environmental sensitivity and personal norms, significantly influenced environmental behaviors. Then I used interviews to examine how these attitudes correlated with each other and how they impacted the development of behaviors.
This sounds very interesting. So, and based on your research, do you have any practical suggestions, tips, or any recommendations for environmental educators who work with school children?
那基于我自己的研
Well,
究，
based
我
on
认
the
为
findings of my research, I think it is very important to take children out to get in touch with nature. We don't have to ask our children to do a lot of things in nature, but just let them observe, touch, and feel nature through their own eyes, hands, and bodies. In addition, I don't think the knowledge attitudes behavior model has been out of date. Actually, the influence of knowledge on environmental behavior, especially on the sustainability of behavior, is essential. We need knowledge, especially ecological knowledge.
But you know, some people think that this model is outdated.
我认为其实上之
I
前
think
的
that the previous research follows the knowledge, attitude, behavior model. The knowledge comes first and then attitude and behavior. However, sometimes it works backward. For example, you cannot just teach the students importance of climate change in classroom and ask them to protect the environment, we should take the students out to see the consequences of climate change and how climate change impacts their lives. Through observing, they realize that climate change did happen and did influence their lives, which could motivate them to think and ask questions. Then they get a better understanding of climate change.
So, is it that you claim that since although environmental education cared about environmental attitudes for, like 30 or 40 years already, and do we still follow the same model of how environmental attitudes combined with other factors may lead to pro-environmental behavior? Or should we still care about environmental attitudes, and like why?
态度它其实是非常重要的。
Attitudes are important. Previous research didn't show or failed to show a strong correlation between attitudes and behaviors. I think it's probably because the previous research used a very broad definition of attitudes, rather than narrowing it down to more specific dimensions. Further, the measures were not well developed, so I think the future research should pay more attention to more specific dimensions of attitudes, examine the correlations among these attitude dimensions, and explore the causal relationship of these attitude dimensions and behaviors.
Well, thank you. I think you convinced me and a lot of our listeners that environmental attitudes is still a very important outcome of environmental education, and we should try to promote it along with other outcomes of environmental education. Thank you very much, Lin Chong.
谢谢 Alex。